time 6:45. At this time, we present May Kennedy and well-known Ozarkian Dewey Short for renomination has been sponsored and paid for by Mrs. McCord.
His friends, good word for a mighty fine man, a lover of the Ozark Empire, the Honorable Dewey Jackson Short was on the Republican ticket subject. Dewey Short has stalked across the pages of Missouri and legislation, leaving the finality in the halls of Congress for six. Not a doubt, but he will stalk across them. Known Dewey from a baby. 8th child was ever dreamed of. They are good people of the salty earth. People of home, the Shorts and the Longs from whom Dewey came cut their way up into this Ozark country a century ago with a broadaxe, driving and following oxen wagons. They were not the shifting and moving about critters, as Aunt Tobias says, like a dog with a mange. They came from the good and sturdy stock which emigrated up into this pioneer country from the Appalachians, coming from the landed people of England and the British Isles. Their roots are cut deep into the soil. A tree is known not by its wind-swept branches, but by the depths of its roots in the soil. And so, I have not turned politician, but I am simply here speaking for a friend, without money and without price, and I want you to listen to me. Because I believe, as I have believed for many years, that Dewey Short is a man we vitally need, that he is irreplaceable in these Ozark Mountains, that he is a man of the deepest convictions, the most rugged honesty, the most sweeping and intelligent outlook on world affairs, that he is a friend to the last ditch. And the fact that I have known him from his childhood, when he was a serious-minded, tousle-headed, very hard-working little boy, should naturally have some weight with the good people to whom I am speaking. Dewey and I are clansmen, you might say, coming out of a tribe of steel-toed hill climbers, and loyalty is our watchword. Down in Stone County, if you say anything against any of our tribesmen, we whittle you down to our size, so you'd better not. Dewey Short loves his home and his hills as few people ever do. He has that bump of nativity in his makeup, and that love of home and friends. He considers the Ozarks of more importance than all the kingdoms of Europe that ever flourished, and all the princes that ever reigned, and all the parliaments that ever sat. And if any of you know Dewey personally, you know that's a fact and not just talk. I remember one time years ago when Dewey and I were talking down at our home in Galena about people who went away from home and got a little bit of fool prominence of some sort, got absorbed in the big world, got lost and choked with the craving for power, and as Granny says, got too big for their britches. And Dewey said to me, May, rather than turn my back on my people and my country and get to be a dirty, job-hunting, ward-heeling politician with my hand stuck out behind me for any money or bribe that might fall into it, I would rather leave the city of Washington forever and live in the poorest cabin in the deepest Ozarks with a dog and a fiddle and a coonskin stretched over the window and eat poke greens and fat back the rest of my days. And that sounds just like Dewey, and I knew he meant it. And I said, Dewey, whatever faults you have, and you have them like everybody else, I believe you're the most honest, outspoken man I ever knew, besides being the ablest. Rarely ever the two go together. You are honest to your own detriment. And then he talked to me about the old boys in ages past, about Patrick Henry and George Washington, when his country offered to make him a king and he refused. And all the men of history, he said, who made this nation and who were honest for their convictions. And I thought then that this young congressman would speak his rights if, as the poet says, the block would soak his gore or his head be nailed to city gates. And I've never changed my mind. He has that militant stubbornness. And he also has that sort of sit-down passive resistance of quiet silence like Mahatma Gandhi had. And believe me, the combination creates a man fit to tie to in a great crisis of bewilderment such as we're in today. Dewey Short is a man of ability and importance now in America. He is one of the finest orators this era has produced. I was told by the guides myself when I was in the Capitol some years ago that whenever it was known that Short was to speak, the absent legislators began to pour in from all the smoking rooms and lounges to listen. For he is a man to be heard. His words are words of wisdom, and they are fearless. He has been a member for 14 years of the important and high-powered Armed Services Committee of this nation. And this coming January, on the retirement of Mr. Andrews of Buffalo, New York, Dewey will be chairman. He is chairman of the Petroleum Subcommittee and has made a long and tedious research and report over months, which has received great commendation both here and abroad. He was chairman of a committee sent to Europe to study post-war conditions there. He has been to Europe and, in fact, over the whole world, many trips. And he is not only an American statesman, but he is equipped for international statesmanship, if needed. He studied when a student in Heidelberg, Berlin, and Oxford University in England. We cannot afford to switch such a man now for young beginners who will have to go to Congress and start at the foot of the class and try to work up, no matter how deserving they might be. There is no substitute for experience. And we have a great man in Dewey Short for the Ozarks. We must use him. He has been hogtied and handicapped for 16 years by a buckaroo and recalcitrant Congress. He has just now come into an era when he can do us a lot of good. Dewey Short is kind and of a loving and friendly disposition. He is not a man of spite and rancor, and one who uses cheap and undignified means in his campaigns. He says of his two opponents, why, they're good boys, and I admire their ambitions. And I hope someday in the future that they realize all their dreams, but not just now. Dewey is the congressman who helped Quentin Hayden, his opponent, to get his job over in Nuremberg, helping to prosecute German war criminals. Mr. Hayden was not a veteran. He obtained this civilian job and spent some time over there after the war ended. Dewey has just turned 50 and at an early age was a volunteer in World War I. Well do I remember the slender slip of an enthusiastic but serious-minded boy who left on the train in my little hometown of Galena. He has served through the most difficult years of Congress that this nation has ever seen. He has voted for every good and important stand this Congress has taken. Recently, in Congress, he made an impassioned plea for increase of pension for the old folks. Fearlessly, he called the present dole of assistance a shameful and inadequate hodgepodge. It was increased, and he still thinks old age assistance in general is insufficient. He always has supported soil conservation and voted for $7 million more than the budget requested in the last session of Congress to fertilize and conserve the soil. He voted for REA, for he loves the farmers. He stood up and voted with his colleagues for $400 million for the farmers, which is $100 million more than the president asked for. And the reason you farmers don't have all electrical equipment right now is that we are shipping abroad $500 million a year in copper wire and all other equipment. Dewey says he himself saw it stacked in Egypt, Greece, and Turkey, and South America, and other foreign countries. He has voted for aid to veterans in every instance and helped them with his whole soul, including Spanish War veterans, and for good highways and the increase to postal employees and retired railroad men. He is not much of a man for war and warmongers, there's no denying that, though he does believe in adequate national defense. But Dewey Short has never carried water on both shoulders. He has stood alone over and over. Dewey says that one of his opponents says he has been so long in Washington that he has forgotten his constituents and thinks he owns the Capitol. What about Sam Rayburn and Uncle Joe Cannon and Champ Clark and Harold Knudsen and Joe Martin and many others who have done things for the country? And then his other opponent complains that he ought to be back in Congress now when the special session has been called. Well, now just keep our shirts on and let Dewey have a week at home speaking for himself. He deserves it. He knows that Congress adjourned sine die, which means that all bills died. And they will have to be introduced all over again, which will take a week or 10 days of red taping and fiddling and fuddling around. And Dewey will be right there when his name is called on the roll for voting or legislation. He always has and he always will. I think Dewey knows his way around. I shall never forget when his voice was the first and almost the one lone voice in this country as he stepped to the front of the platform right here in Phelps Grove Park the day the long dead and discredited NRA was inaugurated with yelling and marching. And he said, "This thing is unconstitutional and will be abolished by the Supreme Court of the land in 1 year." And you could have heard a pin drop, for everyone was aghast. He was speaking to his fellow Republicans, and they were aghast at his courage and a bit put out with him. Even my own husband, who'd known Dewey from a baby, and was his staunch friend. And we all wondered if he were prophesying wisely and if he hadn't better go along with the whole thing, as most everyone thought we should. But that was Dewey Short, and nobody could do anything about it, for he believed exactly what he said. But it was a prophetic voice, for in 8 months, 4 months less than his prophecy that night, the Supreme Court ruled it unconstitutional and swept it from the American government. And history has vindicated Dewey Short. Let's go to the polls August the 3rd and nominate again a man to Congress who, in his own words, believes that America is God's last chance to make a world. And thank you so much for listening. Goodbye.
You have just heard May Kennedy McCord, well-known Ozarkian and author of Hillbilly Heartbeats, speaking in behalf of the candidacy of Dewey Short for renomination as representative of the 7th District of Missouri in Congress. This broadcast has been paid for by friends of Dewey Short.